What happens to a high-performance fighter aircraft that loses half its wing in combat? Common sense and the laws of physics tell us that the aircraft will go into an unrecoverable spin. The asymmetric lift forces, the additional drag forces, the loss of control effectiveness. It's a recipe for almost certain death for any pilot unlucky enough to be subjected to such a disaster. But for a Royal Air Force pilot in the autumn of 1940, over the English Channel, the Spitfire he flew would prove to be no ordinary aircraft. And what he accomplished with a damaged wing, a dying engine and 50 miles of cold water below him would become one of the most remarkable stories of the Battle of Britain. A tale that would defy the laws of aerodynamics and save the life of a man who would go on to become one of the most distinguished fighter pilots of the Second World War. This is the story of Sergeant Cyril Babbage, his battered Spitfire, and the peculiarity of aerodynamics that got him home. To comprehend the events of September 11, 1940, it is necessary to first comprehend the man who flew the plane, and the plane itself. Cyril Frederick Babbage was born in the Shropshire town of Ludlow on June 25, 1917. Prior to the war, he worked in his family's butcher's shop, a humble occupation that hinted little of the mettle he would soon show in the skies above southern England. On the 1st of October, 1938, as the spectre of war loomed over Europe, Babbage joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve as an airman under training pilot. On the 1st of September, 1939, when war was declared in Europe, he was immediately called up. By August 1940, as the Battle of Britain reached a frantic pitch, Babbage had qualified as a pilot and joined 602 Squadron at Westhampton in West Sussex. The squadron flew Supermarine Spitfires, those gallant fighter planes that had captured the hearts of the British people and were now locked in a desperate battle of wits and guns with the Luftwaffe for aerial superiority. The Spitfire Babbage flew was a masterpiece of aerodynamic design. Conceived by R.J. Mitchell and refined after his death by his colleague Joseph Smith, the Spitfire's most distinctive feature was its elliptical wing, a shape that was not merely aesthetic but profoundly functional. Designed in consultation with aerodynamicist Beverly Shenstone, the elliptical planform allowed the thinnest possible wing cross-section while maintaining structural strength and accommodating the retractable undercarriage and 8.303 Browning machine guns. But what made the Spitfire special, and what would save Babbage's life, was something far less visible than its elegant shape. The wing was built around a single main spar, with the leading edge forming what engineers call a D-box, a torsionally stiff structure that carried a significant portion of the wing's loads. Unlike traditional two-spar designs, the Spitfire's rear spar was lighter, serving primarily as an attachment point for the ailerons and flaps. The real strength was in that leading edge, a fact that German pilots, aiming their cannon fire at the wing roots, never fully appreciated. By early September 1940, Babbage had already proven himself in combat. On August 18, he claimed a Junkers Ju-87 Stuka destroyed. The next day, he shared in the destruction of a Ju-88. On August 25, he destroyed a Dornier Du-17 and a Messerschmitt Bf-110. The following day, he probably destroyed a Bf-109 before being shot down himself, bailing out into the channel and being rescued by a rowing boat near Bognor Pier. But September 11th would present a different kind of challenge, not just survival, but survival against the odds with a machine that should have been unflyable. The date was September 11th, 1940. The Battle of Britain was entering its most critical phase. The Luftwaffe, having failed to destroy RAF Fighter Command in daylight, had shifted tactics, now targeting London and other cities in what would become known as the Blitz. But the fighter sweeps continued, and the men of 602 Squadron scrambled repeatedly to meet them. Babbage took off from Westhampton in Spitfire X-4269, a Mark I aircraft powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin III engine, producing just over 1,000 horsepower. His section was vectored towards Selsey Bill, a headland on the Sussex coast that had become a frequent battleground, a place where incoming German formations would turn north toward London, and where RAF fighters would try to intercept them before they reached their targets. The weather that day was typical for an English September: broken cloud at medium altitude, with patches of clear sky and limited visibility in the haze. It was the kind of conditions that favored the defender, allowing fighters to bounce unsuspecting formations from above, but also the kind that could hide enemy aircraft until they were right on top of you. Babbage's section spotted the German formation near Selsey Bill, a group of Messerschmitt Bf-110s, the twin-engine heavy fighters that the Luftwaffe had hoped would dominate British skies. The Bf-110 was a formidable aircraft, heavily armed with cannon in the nose and a rear gunner for defense. But it was no match for the more agile Spitfire in a turning fight, provided the Spitfire pilot could get close enough without being hit. The section attacked. Babbage chose his target, dived, and the Merlin engine roared as the speed built up. The Bf-110s, aware of the threat, started to move defensively, trying to keep their rear gunners focused on the attacking fighter. Tracers filled the sky. Babbage waited until the last moment before pressing the firing button on his spade grip. The 8 Brownings fired, sending a stream of .303 bullets towards the German fighter. He saw strikes on the Bf-110's fuselage. The German fighter started to trail smoke, then fell out of control. It was a kill, or as close to a kill as a pilot could hope for, in the confusion of a dogfight. But in that instant of triumph, Babbage's own aircraft was about to become the target. A German fighter, likely one of the Bf-110's wingmen, or possibly a Bf-109 escort, had maneuvered behind him. The pilot was skilled, holding his fire until he had a steady solution. When he fired, his cannon rounds struck home. The impact was shattering. Babbage felt the aircraft shudder as high-explosive shells slammed into his starboard wing. The sound was unlike anything he'd heard before, a tearing, hammering roar that seemed to go on for seconds. Smoke and debris streamed past the cockpit. The controls went loose in his hands, then stiff, then loose again. He looked to his right and saw something that should have made him reach for the parachute release immediately. The entire outer section of his starboard wing, from about midspan out to the tip, had been virtually severed. Cannon fire had ripped through the leading edge, shredded the upper and lower skins, and destroyed the internal structure. Only the main spar, the single strong backbone of the wing, remained partially intact, holding the outer panel in place by what could only be described as a miracle of engineering. The aileron on that side was gone, just a few twisted pieces of metal flapping in the slipstream. By any reasonable assessment, Babbage's Spitfire should have been unflyable. With asymmetric lift, the aircraft should have rolled violently to the right. With the aileron destroyed, he should have had no way to counteract that roll. With the structural integrity of the wing compromised, the whole outer panel should have folded upward or downward, tearing free entirely and sending the aircraft into an unrecoverable spin. But the Spitfire did not spin. It did not roll uncontrollably. It continued to fly. Babbage's first instinct was survival, not of the aircraft but of himself. The standard procedure for a pilot whose aircraft had suffered catastrophic damage was simple: get out. Parachutes had saved countless lives during the Battle of Britain, and with the English Channel below him and the French coast held by the enemy, bailing out over water was infinitely preferable to being captured. But as Babbage reached for the canopy release, he made a discovery that would change everything. The aircraft was still responding. Not well. The controls were heavy. The Spitfire wanted to roll and yaw to the right, but with firm pressure on the left rudder and a constant pull on the control column, he could maintain something approaching level flight. He looked again at the damaged wing. The sight was horrifying. The leading edge was gone, just an open gap where the smooth D-box should have been. The skin was peeled back like the lid of a sardine can. He could see inside the wing structure, could see the ribs and the main spar, could see daylight through gaps that shouldn't exist. The aileron was completely missing. The wingtip, if it could still be called that, was hanging at an angle, held only by the spar and a few strips of twisted metal. And yet, the wing was still generating lift. How? The answer lay in that single spar and the D-box construction that Mitchell and his team had pioneered. Unlike conventional wing designs of the period, which relied on two spars to carry the bending and torsional loads, the Spitfire's wing concentrated its strength in the leading edge. The D-box, so called because its cross-section resembled the letter D, formed a torsionally stiff structure that resisted twisting forces. When the leading edge was destroyed, much of that torsional stiffness was lost, but the main spar remained. The spar itself was a remarkable piece of engineering. It was a built-up structure, consisting of a heavy-gauge web with booms top and bottom, designed to carry the bending loads imposed by the wing's lift. As long as that spar remained intact, the wing would continue to provide lift, even if the skin was gone, even if the aerodynamic shape was destroyed, even if the aileron was missing. But there was another factor at play, one that Babbage couldn't see from the cockpit, but that engineers would later appreciate. The damaged wing, by losing its outer section, had effectively become shorter. A shorter wing generates less lift, but it also generates less drag, and the reduction in drag on the damaged side may have partially offset the asymmetric lift that would otherwise have rolled the aircraft over. It was a fluke, a random outcome of the way the cannon shells had hit, that the remaining stub of wing was producing just enough lift, with just enough drag, to allow Babbage to maintain control. But maintaining control was not the same as flying home. Babbage was over the channel, at medium altitude, with an aircraft that was barely airworthy. The engine was still running. Miraculously, the cannon shells had missed the Merlin, missed the fuel tanks, missed the pilot himself. But the damage to the wing was affecting the aircraft's handling in ways that made every moment a battle. The Spitfire wanted to turn right. To fly straight, Babbage had to hold constant left rudder, not just occasional corrections, but continuous sustained pressure that fatigued his left leg within minutes. He had to hold the control column slightly left as well, fighting the aircraft's natural tendency to roll. And he had to do all of this while watching his instruments, scanning for enemy aircraft, and trying to figure out exactly where he was.
The English coast was somewhere to the north. How far, he couldn't be sure.
The dogfight had taken him over the channel, and in the confusion of combat, he'd lost track of his position. He estimated he was at least 30 miles from land, maybe more. At the reduced speed he was forced to fly, too fast and the damaged wing might fail entirely, too slow and he'd lose control. It would take the better part of an hour to reach the coast. An hour of constant, exhausting control inputs. An hour of watching that damaged wing flex and twist in the slipstream, waiting for it to finally give way. An hour of wondering whether he'd make it, or whether he'd end up in the cold water of the channel, waiting for rescue that might or might not come. And there was another problem, one that Babbage may not have fully appreciated at the time, but that would later be documented by the Royal Aircraft Establishment. The Spitfire's wing, even when undamaged, had a tendency to twist under load. At speeds above 400 miles per hour indicated, roughly 65% of aileron effectiveness was lost due to wing twist. The theoretical aileron reversal speed, the speed at which the controls would work backwards, was calculated at 580 miles per hour. Babbage wasn't flying that fast, but with his wing damaged, the margins were even smaller. Any sudden maneuver, any sharp control input, any increase in speed could push the aircraft past its limits. So he flew straight and level, as gently as possible, nursing the Spitfire toward the distant coast. For 40 minutes, he wrestled with the controls. The English coast was coming into view as a thin line of gray between the blue of the sea and the gray of the sky. He saw familiar landmarks, Selsey Bill to the east, the Isle of Wight someplace to the west. He was more or less on course to head back to his base at Westhampton, but he was not sure if he had enough time to get that far. The damage to the wing was getting worse. The vibration had increased steadily, he would recall later, and the constant flexing of the weakened structure had caused more damage with each passing minute. He could see the outer panel moving now, not just flexing, but actually moving independently of the other part of the wing, pivoting on the main spar like a door on its hinges. It was only a matter of time before it failed completely. He had to get down. Now. Westhampton was still too far. But ahead, Babbage spotted an airfield, Merston, a satellite field near Chichester, used by various squadrons as a forward operating base. It wasn't his home base, but it was a place to land. And right now, that was all that mattered.
Pause.
The approach to Merston required a left-hand circuit, a standard procedure for most RAF airfields. But a left-hand circuit meant turning left, and turning left with a damaged right wing presented a problem. The aircraft wanted to turn right. Turning left required even more control input, even more stress on the already stressed wing. Babbage set up his approach wide, giving himself room to maneuver. He reduced power slowly, feeling the Spitfire respond, sluggishly, heavily, but respond nonetheless. He turned left, holding constant rudder and aileron, watching the damaged wing for any sign that it was about to fail. The airfield grew larger in his windscreen. The runway, a grass strip typical of RAF fighter fields, stretched out before him. He was high, too high, and had to lose altitude quickly. He slipped the aircraft, a maneuver that involves crossing the controls to increase drag and lose height without gaining speed. It was a risky move with a damaged wing, but Babbage had no choice.
The Spitfire dropped.
The ground rushed up. Babbage leveled off, reduced power further, and prepared to touch down. Landing a damaged aircraft is always dangerous. The sudden reduction in speed, the change in angle of attack, the transition from flight to ground, all of these can impose loads that a damaged structure cannot withstand. Babbage knew that his wing might fail at the moment of touchdown, that the aircraft might cartwheel, that he might not survive the landing.
But he had no choice. The wheels touched.
The Spitfire rolled, bouncing slightly on the grass.
Babbage held the control steady, keeping the wings level, letting the aircraft slow naturally.
The damaged wing held.
He was down.
When Babbage climbed out of Spitfire X-4269 at Merston, the ground crew who gathered around the aircraft could barely believe what they were seeing. The starboard wing was a wreck, half of it missing, the rest hanging by a thread.
The aileron was gone.
The leading edge was torn open. The skin was peeled back in jagged strips. And yet, the pilot was alive, and the aircraft was in one piece, barely. Later examination would reveal just how close Babbage had come to death. The main spar had held, but only just. Several of the ribs were shattered. The wingtip, such as it was attached by no more than a few square inches of metal. Another 5 minutes of flight, another sharp maneuver, even a sudden gust of wind, any of these could have been enough to finish what the German cannon shells had started. But Babbage had made it. And in doing so, he had demonstrated something that aerodynamicists had theorized but never proven, that a Spitfire could survive catastrophic wing damage and still fly.
Pause.
The secret, as engineers would later explain, lay in that single-spar construction. By concentrating the structural strength in the main spar, Mitchell had created a wing that could lose most of its skin and still carry load. The D-box provided torsional stiffness, but the spar provided bending strength. And as long as the spar remained intact, the wing would continue to generate lift, even if the aerodynamic shape was destroyed. It was, in many ways, a fluke, a combination of factors that no designer could have predicted. The specific location of the damage, the fact that the spar itself had not been severed, the reduction in drag on the damaged side, the pilot's skill in nursing the aircraft home, all of these contributed to a survival that defied the odds. But it was also a testament to the brilliance of R.J. Mitchell's design. The Spitfire was not just a beautiful aircraft, it was a tough one, capable of absorbing punishment that would have destroyed lesser machines. And in the hands of pilots like Cyril Babbage, that toughness saved lives. Babbage himself would continue to serve throughout the war. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal in October 1940, commissioned in late November, and later flew an operational tour on Mosquitoes, during which he was shot down not once but twice. He remained in the RAF after the war, retiring in 1964 with the rank of Wing Commander. He died on November 24, 1976, at his home in Larkhall, Bath. But on September 11, 1940, he was just a young sergeant pilot, fighting for his life over the English Channel, flying an aircraft that should have been unflyable. And he survived because of a fluke of aerodynamics, a brilliant design, and his own sheer determination. The Spitfire's single-spar wing was often criticized by those who favored more conventional designs. But on that autumn day in 1940, it proved its worth in the most dramatic way possible, by bringing a young pilot home through 50 miles of enemy sky with half his wing shot away.
The plane itself?
Spitfire X-42-69 went back into the skies, fighting on through the Battle of Britain and well beyond. It made it through the war as a testament to the durability of Mitchell's design. Today, the plane itself is nothing more than a memory preserved in photographs. But the story of that flight lives on as a reminder that in the dark days of 1940, ordinary men performed feats of heroism that would have seemed impossible to anyone else. Sometimes, the difference between life and death is the genius of the engineer who designed the wings of the plane that carried them through the fight. This is just one of the thousands of stories from the Second World War that have never been told. Subscribe to World War II Records as we bring more of the forgotten history of the Second World War to life.